PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. We're into the semi-finals of the Weissenhaus Freestyle tournament. Remember, this is Fischer random chess, and in the knockout stage, they're playing with a classical time control. Just to make things absolutely clear. So, two semi-finals. We have Caruana against Sindarov. And the other one is Vincent Keymer against Magnus Carlsen. Now, they play one game today and another game tomorrow. So let's look at this first one. Keymer against Carlsen. Okay, first of all, we've got to take in the baseline and what's going on there. Yeah, it's pretty unusual, I have to say, with the knights in the corner. On the bishops, yeah, slightly odd placement. Some random baselines are more random than others. This looks unusual. Okay, g4. Reasonable. You know, you might be able to bring the queen into play. Anyway, the queen supports the pawn. Knight g6. The knights have to come out of the corner at some stage. Knight b3. Yeah, that one comes out. e5. That's quite a committal move from Carlsen, because after knight g3, then this knight has access to the f5 square. But seems like a reasonable setup for black. Certainly nice to open up this diagonal and, you know, the bishop coming out here potentially. c4. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of a kind of English or closed Sicilian position with colours reversed, where the Sicilian player, the English player, gets very nice control over these light squares, actually. And Carlsen now castles. It's very interesting. So this is about connecting the rooks. We've seen in previous games how if you don't connect those rooks, the king can be really stuck between the two rooks. So Magnus is making sure that his rooks are going to be connected. So d4, breaking out in the middle, and of course white would be very happy to get nice central control like this. So Carlsen plays knight b6 instead. So attacking this pawn. And Keymer decides to close the position. So once the pawn structure becomes fixed, then it's easier to determine where the pieces should go, and it's easier just to understand strategy. And we can see that this kind of fixed structure is a little bit similar to a King's Indian, except the kings are in very strange positions. Bishop f5. Looks reasonable. Check. So the bishop would like to land on e6, but that's not happening after this move. f3 opens up this diagonal. That's very nice. a6. Yeah, this bishop is a terrible piece. It needs to come into the game. e4. That surprised me when I saw e4, because it gives this square to the knight. But it also secures the f5 square. So, you know, there are pros and cons to this move. And basically, positionally, this feels very pleasant for white, in spite of allowing this knight in. I think Keymer is doing well at this point. But here he played a very committal move. He ran with his king. So he wants to put it on b1, which of course is a very good idea. He wants to tuck the king away. And you often see this in the King's Indian. I mean, Carlsen's king is in absolutely the wrong position, because this is where white wants to attack, pushing the c-pawn. King should be over here, as in most King's Indian positions. But still, king c2 is a bit weird, particularly considering this pawn could be taken. I'll look at that in a second. I mean, another way of shuffling the king across the board might have been to play rook c2 and then bring the king over. That's an idea. In any case, king c2. Carlsen played bishop a7 and continued with his plan. So can he play knight takes c4? This is the question. So Keymer's idea was obviously king b1. And there's a problem on the c file. If knight b6, queen takes b6, pin and win. But in fact, there's a curious little shuffle here. Knight h3, and the queen steps up, and knight f4, and the queen goes back. I mean, not queen c2 because of that. So the queen would go back, and then it'll be a draw. I mean, maybe Carlsen realised that and thought, well, I'm not having a draw. I'm not going to take that. So played bishop a7 instead. Who knows? Too early in the game after just 11 moves. So bishop d2. And now knight takes c4 is impossible because of queen takes bishop. King b8. That guards the bishop. So now it is possible to take here. So bishop e3. So that's why Keymer made this little shuffle. Didn't want to go to f2 because that would allow knight h3. And this looks pleasant for Keymer. I think he's doing very well. Knight h3, queen g2, knight f4. So Carlsen testing the water. Does Keymer want to draw after queen g1? No, he wants to play on. I think rightly so. Nice space advantage. Those light squares look a bit dodgy for black. h5. So Carlsen needs counterplay. So he starts to open up the king side, which is reasonable. Rook d1. So I think Keymer is looking to play c5. Perhaps he was concerned about potentially a sacrifice here. Exchange on g4. Yeah, I mean, Carlsen is going to get some counterplay on the h file. Knight c8. So the knight drops back. Wants to exchange those bishops. And instead of exchanging, which would bring the knight to a better square, Keymer plays c5. Of course, this is the classic King's Indian break. This is what you want to do. Open up the c file. And in this case, you're attacking black's king as well. So Carlsen really has to take that before the pawn advances again. And bishop takes. Thing is, this knight can potentially get to c5, and that looks really menacing. Looking over at some really important squares and the king as well. g6. Okay, that covers f5. Exchange on a7, and finally the king makes it to b1. So Keymer has achieved some security here. But at least Carlsen can console himself that this knight is on an excellent position and there is counterplay on the h file. So the fact that Keymer has got in c5, yeah, it's an achievement, but black has counterplay. Queen h7. So knight c5, the knight steps in, looks really nice. Very interesting moments in the game. I mean, this is such a difficult position strategically, and there are also some weird tactics as well. My computer suggests a4. Now that's obviously to prevent knight b5, which can head in to the d4 square. And yeah, I can see the benefits of playing a4. Just controls that knight. But Keymer played knight e2. Well, it's a clear strategy. He wants to exchange off this knight and then put this knight on e6. Really dangerous. Knight takes, queen takes, and knight b5. So this is the... Yeah, this is black's counterplay. This is Carlsen's counterplay. It's going to head to d4. Knight e6 looks like a good move. This wasn't played because it covers d4, hits this, hits this. But actually, after rook h8, black has pretty good counterplay. And here's the thing. After a4, looks like white is going to break through here, but actually you can exchange off that knight. There's no pressure on c7, and then h2 is hanging, so black is actually okay there. So this is a really finely balanced position. Queen c4. Now in this case, if queen takes a4, knight d4, watch out. Knight b7 is absolutely crushing because c7 is dropping. That's why Carlsen played rook c8. And Keymer pushed the knight to d4. Well, that looks like an odd decision at first glance, but he's got a very clever idea in mind. He played g5. Now that is really going for it. Now earlier on in the game, Carlsen had a time advantage, but things had evened up, and by this stage, move 27, time is really ticking down. Both players, in some time pressure. So they have 90 minutes plus 30 seconds per move, but that disappears very quickly. What's the point of g5? Well, if pawn takes, I'm sure Keymer's intention was to sack the exchange and play e5. I mean, it looks so dangerous. And if this rook drops back, then queen b3 is already incredibly strong. And actually, after e5, black can hang on with king a8, because if that's taken, then there's a pin here and black survives. But okay, when you're short of time, you're not going to bother trying to look for some kind of miracle defense like this. And I should say that white is still doing very well here. At least a very nice initiative. So Carlsen decided after g5 to play rook cd8. An exchange on f6. And yeah, it's interesting. How's that benefited white? Well, Keymer plays rook f1. He just wants to exchange off that rook. And one of the ideas is this. So rook takes queen h2 and then rook f7. And this is just too much for black. That a4 move is actually very clever because it gives the king an escape square. And if rook f8, then queen b4 and a nasty threat. And rook b6 is no longer possible because the rook hangs. So rook f1 is a clever idea. Rook b6. So that obviously stops white attacking with the queen on the b file. Rook f2 keeps everything under control, just holding the position. g5, so that opens up this diagonal, so that kind of restricts the knight. So king a2, that's a very tidy move. I like that. I mean, it's almost like a reflex move in time pressure, just to get the king off this diagonal, but I think it's very sound. It means that this knight might be able to move, and then queen takes pawn doesn't come with check. King's just much safer on a2. King a7 played. Well, Carlsen follows suit. Rook f1. And, I mean, Carlsen has gone wrong. I mean, instead of king a7, well, for what it's worth, the computer still believes that black is equal after g4. Anyway, king a7 played. Rook f1, and now g4 played by Carlsen. And Keymer actually has a killer move here. He could have played rook f7, and that is game over. And here's the point. After this, that threatens mate. So that gets stopped. Okay, queen g1, and now rook takes c7. Beautiful idea. If queen takes rook, you give that one and mate on b7. So that's the tactical reason why rook f7 is a very strong move. But Keymer played instead queen c3. So he's looking maybe looking across to this side of the board. Who knows? Anyway, knight f3 played. Ah, no, of course. I realised with queen c3, he's defending b2, so that he wants to play rook f7, and he's not worried about this, and then he can break through here. Okay, he obviously missed that mating tactic, but I'm not blaming him. When you're short of time, you don't have time to calculate the finesses in the position. Okay, so rook g2 hits that one. Rook g8, rook f2. Nice and solid. Everything is protected. I mean, I think I would still prefer white in this position. This knight looks so good. And somehow, well, dare I say it, split rooks. Not too good. But here is where Carlsen did something strange. He backed down. He retreated. He played rook d6. You've got to play knight d4. And if a5, well, keep the rook there. I mean, this looks really weird, but I think black just has to do this. So rook d6 played. But now Keymer starts to take control. Queen e3. So the king backs down. Knight e6. Finally, the knight ends up on e6. And it looks superb. I mean, it really does dominate these rooks, actually. And this is a difficult position for Carlsen, but he now played c6. So, you know, he wants to fight back, trying to undermine the position of the knight. Okay. Time for you to have a think. Time for me to have a drink. What would you play as white in this position? Cheers. In fact, there are two good moves. Queen b6 is very strong, with a threat of knight c7 and etc. taking on a6. But Keymer played queen a3. Also incredibly strong. And this just overloads black. So for example, okay, this threat has to be dealt with. Moving it back allows knight f8. Well, that's very unfortunate. What else have we got? Queen here, protecting the rook. Allows rook takes f3. There's a pin. The rook is hanging. And yeah, there's not a lot else. So Carlsen decided to sack the exchange. But, you know, his time was ticking right down. I mean, you know, this is move 39. And it was going right down to the wire. And he played rook c8 with, you know, seconds to spare. But he resigned before Keymer moved. You know, if rook takes g4, white is just breaking through. Rook f8. Exchange off the rook. Push the e-pawn. It's absolutely game over. Yeah, Carlsen is just completely lost here. So that's the final position. Well, what a fantastic win for Vincent Keymer. You know, he showed that in the quarterfinal that he had real staying power when he came through against Alireza Firuzjar from a difficult position in the second game, and well, beating the world number one is not bad. He's doing really well, and a very interesting game. I mean, you know, in Fischer Random plays, I think it's always going to be uneven. But basically, Keymer was never worse in this game, and seemed to me he was always pressing to be better. And finally, Carlsen, under a lot of pressure, cracked. So that means in the second game tomorrow, that's Wednesday, Carlsen is in a must-win situation. He has to win to get it to 1-1, and then they go into tie breaks. So pressure on Magnus Carlsen. I should mention that in the other game, Sindarov and Caruana drew. Right, see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.